All right, Rabbi, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin in Mirz Hashem, Parak Aleph of Oros HaTeshuva, chapter 1. So this is actually quite fascinating because here, as much the introduction, of course, was almost like a beautiful window into Rav Kook's neshama and about his feelings on tshuva. Now, again, in chapter 1, we begin to get into the dynamics of tshuva. But first, what Rav Kook does in a very methodical fashion is to create what we'll call a framework for tshuva. So what does this mean? So Parak Aleph, tshuva tivis, emunis, sichlis. So Rav Kook writes as follows: Es hatshuva anu motzim b'shalosh ma'arachos. There are essentially three different frameworks associated with tshuva. What are they? Number one, Aleph, tshuva tivis, which we will translate as almost natural or instinctive tshuva. Okay, we'll define each of the categories. Beis, tshuva emunis, a tshuva ultimately a faith-based tshuva, and gimel, tshuva sichlis, an intellectual tshuva. So there's essentially instinctive, innate tshuva, tshuva tivis, faith-based emunah, tshuva emunis, and instinctive tshuva, intellectual tshuva, tshuva sichlis. Says Rav Kook, let's analyze it. Now today, we're really just going to focus on the first of the three categories. Hagufanis. What does this mean? Ultimately, b'tshuva tivis, now in what we'll call instinctive or innate tshuva, there's two other subcategories. Yeshnei chalokim. Tshuva tivis gufanis, what we would call a natural or innate physical tshuva, and tshuva tivis nafshis, a natural or innate spiritual tshuva. Okay, so now a lot of categories here to unpack. So let's start first. Hagufanis. So the first thing we're starting with is what we call tshuva tivis gufanis, natural, instinctive, physical tshuva. Okay, what does this mean? Here we go. He says, Hagufanis sobeves es kol ha'averos neged ha'teva, ha'moser v'ha'torah, ha'mekusharim im chukei ha'teva. So this first category of tshuva, what Rav Kook is calling tshuva tivis gufanis. So again, natural, instinctive, physical tshuva is based on a very simple premise. Well, I don't know, simple. Based on the following premise. In general, when a person sins, an avera is against the teva. Avera goes against nature. Now, what does this mean? The world is programmed in a certain way. Like Chazal tell us, Histakil ba'oraisa ubara alma. Kadosh Baruch Hu looked into the Torah and he created the world. Now, what does that mean? What that means is the world itself is the blueprint. Torah itself is the blueprint for Torah, which means that it's Torah itself that's embedded in the very fabric of creation, which then means that when a person does an Avera, by definition, what I'm doing is going against the very fabric of creation. Right? It's not just the pshat that an Avera is against the will of God, an Avera is against the very fabric of creation. So you're going to both say, because again, we often look at Torah in way too limited of a fashion. We look at Torah as a body of knowledge or a body of laws that God gave us to guide us to how to live our lives. That is true. But Torah is also the very master plan for all of creation. So everything in the world, everything in the universe, ultimately is embedded in Torah, and Torah is embedded in everything. This is the idea that we believe that when you look in the world, everything has Kedusha. So why does a tree have Kedusha? Why does a tree have Kedusha? Why do the stars and moon? So of course, on a basic level, they have Kedusha because they were created by God. But on a deeper level, somehow even the trees and even the soil and even the heavens, everything is embedded in the framework of Torah. So therefore, Torah by definition is intertwined with the natural world, with nature. When a person sins, a person does an Avera, they're essentially going against the very laws of nature. Right? The way the laws of nature are set up is that a person follows the Torah. By the way, just interestingly enough, if you look, for example, let's say in Parshas Bechukosai, so the Torah says, what happens if you don't listen to the mitzvahs? So the Torah outlines a whole series of curses. But among them, what does the Torah say? I'm going to withhold the rain. Now, what does withholding of the rain, for example, have to do with transgressing the Torah. Okay, you could say it's a punishment. Hashem's saying, you're not focusing on your spirituality. I'm going to prevent you from acquiring material wealth as well, holding back the rain. But on a deeper level, our Chai brings us down. It's not as much a punishment as much as a cause and effect, or an action and a reaction. When I behave a certain way, the natural world responds to me in a certain way because we're in harmony. We're in harmony. So if I'm living a life of Torah, I'm living a life of spirituality, then I am in sync with the natural world. But if I'm not living a life of Torah, I'm not living a life of holiness, then what ends up happening is I'm not in sync with the natural world. Well, what happens when you're not in sync with the natural world? The natural world doesn't react to you the way you would like it. So therefore, again, there's going to be a problem with the rain. There's going to be a problem with parnasa. There's going to be a problem with many different physical things. So this is important to understand that living a life of spiritual connectedness makes me in harmony and consonance with the natural order of the world. By the way, where else do you see this? Let's say, think about this just a second. When do you have in life, when do you have your greatest appreciation of nature? When does a person appreciate nature most? When spiritually, I'm in a good place, right? When I'm doing, I think, if I know that I had a day filled with Averos, I don't know, like yesterday, I have a day filled with Averos. It's interesting, I find this, that you're much less likely to be moved by a sunset, or to be moved like by a starlit sky, or to feel the Shekhinah in the rustling trees. You don't, but when your neshama's plugged in, I'm feeling all of that. Why? Once again, because when I'm living the life I'm supposed to be living, or at least aspiring to do so, then I'm in harmony with nature. But ultimately, again, if I'm not living the life I'm supposed to be living, then nature and I are not on the same page. So therefore, says Rav Kook, Hagufanis soveves es kol ha'averos shebat, es kol ha'averos neged chukei hateva. So this first level of tshuva, what we call tshuva gufnis tivis, or tivnis gufanis, natural, instinctive, physical tshuva, says as follows. An avera goes against the laws of nature, hamusar v'hatorah, hamikusharim in chukei hateva. Now everything is, right, the laws, nature itself is intertwined with spirituality, with Torah, with halacha, shesof, kol hanhaga ra, hu lahavi machalos umachovin. Okay, so we'll say this is very interesting, and this statement itself is going to require a lot to unpack. Rav Kook says, every negative behavior is somehow going to bring about illness and pain. Illness and pain. What Rav Kook is saying is that when I behave in a spiritually negative way, at some point that manifests itself physically. Manifests, by the way, the paradigmatic example of this was tsaras, right? This was tsaras. Tsaras is not a simple physical malady. That's why when we translate it as leprosy, it's a little bit disingenuous, because remember again, leprosy is an actual physical disease. Tsaras is a physical manifestation of a spiritual illness. I'm a person who is spiritually ill. I'm a person who's speaking lashon hara about others. I'm a person who's coveting what others have. I'm not in a good place. Well, when you're not in a spiritual good place, that manifests itself physically. Again, we always have to be careful with this, not to say that all physical illness represents someone who is sinning, because obviously that's a very dangerous theological rabbit hole to go down. Right? So really every single person who's suffering physically, every single person who's ill, every single person who's dying is because they're a sinner. So we know, again, just because something is true in one direction doesn't necessarily make it true in the opposite direction. But the idea of Kook says is the way sin works is chet will bring about some level of physical suffering. That's the way it works. Sin is going to hit you physically some way, whether it's your health, whether it's your parnas. Again, I can't say enough. This is not to mean that every single person who's suffering with their health or with their parnasa is because they're sinning. That statement is not true. But the other side is true, says Rav Kook. Every hate will ultimately bring about some level of physical distress, some level of material distress. Therefore, he says, a man suffers from this. Man suffers from this. Individual man, collective man, right? This, in other words, what that means is this manifests itself on a personal level, manifests itself on a national level. V'harbe is good. V'acharei haberer, turn the page 10. V'acharei haberer, shemispare etzla hadavar, shu ba'atzmo b'hanagaso hara ashem, b'chol oso dildul hachayim shebalo. And when a person has this moment of awareness where they realize, wow, so much of my suffering and so much of my difficulty is because of the way I'm living and because of the behaviors that I'm engaging in. Shabbos says, so what does a person do? Husam leiv letakin es hamatzov. What does a person do? I want to fix it. I want to fix it. I want to fix it. If I realize that I'm suffering because of my actions, ultimately, again, I want to fix my situation. Loshuv l'chuki achayim, lishmar eschuki hateva, haTorah v'hamusar, l'man yoshuv v'yichye v'yashuvu elav achayim b'chol ra'ananusam. Shabbos said, this is incredible. So what happens when I have this awareness that my sinful behavior is causing physical distress, either illness or problems with parnasa or other forms of physical distress? What do I do? What do I do when I realize this? What do? I want to fix it. I want to fix it. I don't want to live in a state of disharmony. So therefore, again, I begin to pay attention and to fix my situation, to return to be in sync with the natural order, to listen to the laws of nature, Musar and Torah, in order that my life tranquility be restored. So we have to stop over here for today, but this is what Rav Kook calls this first level of tshuva tivis gufanis. Instinctive physical tshuva. Instinctive physical tshuva says, I know that some of the physical discomfort and suffering that I'm experiencing is because of the way that I'm living my life, because I'm at a state of disharmony with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the natural world, and therefore, I want to fix it. So why am I doing tshuva? Why am I returning? Because I want to restore the sense of physical and material tranquility to my life. We'll stop over for today. We're not finished. We're not finished with this. We probably get another 2 shiurim just on this first stage of tshuva, but at least Rav Kook is helping us to develop a framework for all of tshuva. Shkach Havosai. Incredible. Morning, Rabbi. Good morning.